learners, and welcome to our first video about organic chemistry. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you of some things that could be helpful to your learning process, which basically are the pre-lecture and pre information, section. And so that means when you click the day of the week, you will see the lecture is broken down into 3 parts: pre-lecture, lecture, and post-lecture. The pre-lecture section is where I want you to focus on now, and I'm hoping that you spend some time to complete to really get your brain warmed up to learning. So that means that you're going to complete the 1-pager here, like the concept map, to orient your brain. And that also means you're going to review previous information if needed. That means you review a concept or complete a practice problem from a concept, or you'll do both, review and then complete a practice problem. The goal, though, is that the lectures will enhance or add to the pre-lecture information. Now let's get started. Organic chemistry is really the key to understanding the building blocks of life, materials, and countless natural and synthetic compounds. We're talking DNA, protein, paints, textiles, carbohydrates, plastics, gasolines, fibers, drugs. It's endless. So as you can see, with all those things we're talking about, it really shapes our world. This is going to be a very brief introduction to what some of you will understand later in a full-blown organic chemistry course, right? Which takes an entire year. So when I think of the world myself, I think of things in compartments. I think of land, sea, atmosphere, and then the living organisms that inhabit those areas. And then I also think of the elements that are abundant in each realm. So with the sea, we have water, which includes oxygen. And with the atmosphere, we have oxygen and nitrogen. With land, we have silicon and oxygen. And with living organisms, we have carbon and hydrogen. And these elements really govern what the world is made of, which can mirror elements found in the universe. Now, I always love the saying like, oh, we're made of the same stuff as the stars, right? I always thought that was so cute. So that just reminded me of that too. 2 group 4A elements, we're talking group on the periodic table, carbon and silicon, form the basis of most natural substances. So if we break things into just talking about land and the inhabitants or living organisms on land, okay, we can be talking about us, which is our biological world, and then, of course, rocks, minerals, land itself, land mass, which is the geological world, okay? Now, silicon, with this great affinity for oxygen, loves to form chains and rings, which is also what carbon do, form chains and rings. But silicon is not as stable in being able to bond to itself. So instead of just making a bunch of chains and rings of silicon itself, it has to form silicon, oxygen, silicon bridges, okay? So it kind of looks like this: silicon, oxygen, silicon bridges. And these bridges produce silica and silicates, okay? And that's going to help us form the basis for most rocks, sands, and soils. So when you're thinking of silica, you're thinking of the gel for preserving goods. You're thinking of crystals like quartz, for example. When you think of silicates, you're thinking of clay materials, garnet, which is my husband's birthstone, mica, cosmetics, mica meaning like the powder that comes with cosmetics, for example. And again, all of this actually forms, these bridges here, form the basis for this rock, sand, and soil. So what silicon is to the geological world, meaning how ubiquitous it is to so many materials, carbon is to the biological. And why is this? Well, carbon has the unusual ability of bonding strongly to itself. And when it bonds to itself, it actually can make stable covalent bonds, okay? And so not only can it just bond to itself, and that's great, but it also can form long chain. It can form rings from bonding to itself as well, and a combination of all these things. And that term is that the fact that carbon can catenate. And catenation is the ability for carbon to bond to itself and form stable branches, rings, chains, and of course, all those things together in organic compounds. So for us, that means that we can have birds, plants, flowers, insects, and so many different organic compounds that are formed to help life be maintained and reproduced. Okay? And since we know carbon needs an octet, carbon is going to, again, form those strong bonds, and not just to anything. It doesn't just have to bond to itself. It's going to bond to other nonmetals such as hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and of course the halogens. Because of these bonding properties, which we'll get into as we go into the videos, there are a myriad of carbon compounds, like several million are known. And that number is going to continue to grow and grow and grow as people continue to discover. And among these many compounds are the biomolecules. Those are the molecules that are responsible for maintaining and reproducing life as we know it, right? So we're talking about DNA, protein, carbohydrates, lipids. They're made of carbon-based compounds. That's what organic chemistry is all about, right? And so we're going to be able to get to understand them and the derivatives, meaning like DNA, RNA, carbohydrates, lipoproteins, taking carbohydrates and proteins and creating brand new structures. I mean, organic chemistry allows us to have so much diversity that we're going to be learning about. So how do we put it all together? Well, we got to start asking questions. We got to ask questions like, what is organic chemistry? Why is it important? Okay. Does organic chemistry have anything to do with organic food? I mean, we got to kind of get some clarity around things. Because nowadays, the colloquialisms that we use have become part of our understanding, and that can cause a lot more confusion, right? You can want to ask questions like, what is the difference between organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry? Wait, who came up with this stuff? Where's the history of it? And finally, why is organic chemistry essential to the world specifically? Give some examples. So why is organic chemistry important? It's what we're made of, folks. So what are we made of? Those biomolecules I was talking about. Nucleic acids, see here, our DNA and RNA, okay? Proteins, you see here, which pretty much are amino acids, and they make up everything in our body. I mean, from our skin, our hair, nails, etc. We also have lipids or fats, right? And we also have carbohydrates, which makes up a lot of our energy that the brain needs, quick energy, okay? Quick sugars that the brain's going to need. We're also made of vitamins, hormones, enzymes, metabolites, neurotransmitters, all organic compounds that have the same thing in common. They're made of different arrangements of carbon. Boom. And what's carbon attached to? So let's go ahead and look at some of the details. Now, we're going to learn about how to actually read stuff out here, especially with things that are just in straight chains. When it gets to more and more rings, you won't have to be responsible for knowing how to name these rings. You'll learn about those in organic chemistry, so just keep that in mind as well. Okay? But what if I told you that each little dot here is going to represent a carbon atom? We'll learn about this later, okay? Each little dot is going to represent a carbon atom. And so that means we have loads of carbon atoms here, loads of carbon atoms a part of here, here, everywhere, right? And so each of these particular biomolecules all have that in common. They have these chains or rings of these carbon atoms. Okay, because carbon can form all these branches and rings because of that catenation we were talking about, it can come in so many diversity. It's so much diversity, right, in different structures and functions and forms. As you can see here, they all look very different, but they have that common basis. Okay, so we definitely are going to be learning about how carbon is able to make these bonds, and then going further to learn about some of the organic chemicals that are basically normal to us. And what I mean by normal to us is some that we're going to be using a lot in our course to help with like naming and stuff like that. We'll get into detail about. What you're actually seeing here is called skeletal structure, okay? It's basically a way for us to show carbon-carbon bonding, carbon being attached to carbon, right? And without any hydrogen bonds attached, just to make it easier to write and cleaner to see for organic chemists. And we're going to learn about how to see as an organic chemist as we go along as well. So technically, yes, we know that carbon is going to form in various chains and branches, like we talked before. We know it's going to have 4 bonds, or up to 4 bonds that it can actually create. Now I'm just taking that from our table and just our understanding of carbon making up to 4 bonds, all right? But what else do we see here? We also see that carbon is not just bonded to carbon itself, or maybe hydrogen to be able to get its octet. Here you can see a hydrogen and potentially be a hydrogen here. It's also bonded to oxygen here, and bonded to nitrogen, sulfur. And so that means that these molecules, these biomolecules that we're made of in our life have the ability, to have carbon repeats of carbon, 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 carbon bonds, carbon, hydrogen bonds, and bonds with other things, and still remain stable. Still be able to maintain life. So that's pretty much amazing to do. And we're going to be getting into details about why that's so amazing, and actually start learning like an organic chemist and get into all the little details for as much as we can for a brief introduction, right? To get into as many details as possible about this portion. But one thing remains true among all these compounds, okay? And let's just talk about this first. You see it says monomer and then polymer. Mono means one, poly means many. So that means carbon, yes, it can bond to itself, but it's also so amazing because it has the ability to be very modular. It means you can take pieces of things that it creates, like pieces of rings, and attach them to one another. Okay? So a monomer is going to be a piece, and a polymer is many of those repeated pieces, and even more diverse patterns. Okay? So just keep that in mind. But I do want to make this clear. From all these compounds, we know they're made of carbon-carbon bonds, right? But one thing that's for sure, all of them have carbon-hydrogen bonds. So when it comes to organic compounds, and we're trying to like orient our mind around all this, we need to make sure we're understanding that organic compounds are made up of carbon-hydrogen bonds. You have to have at least one carbon-hydrogen bond in order for it to be an organic compound. Okay? And these organic compounds can come together to form a diversity of an array of molecules that are necessary for life. Here's a general cell from biology. The lipids that you see here, the fatty acids, they make up the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, carbohydrates are needed for energy, just for your brain and fuel, and also just needed to basically create a lot of transport on the outside for cell communication, and a lot of transport on the inside of the actual cell as well. We have nucleotides, which of course give the genetic material from the nucleus to help produce different proteins that do different things, make the eyes, make the hair, make the nails, right? And then of course we have amino acids that are made in good old ribosomes that are like our protein houses that help us, of course, build proteins out. So again, repeated units coming together to create new structures. All this is going to help us kind of orient our brain around what is organic chemistry about right now. Okay? So just by looking at and thinking about what we're talking about, we can have what's called a flashcard moment. And a flashcard moment is just simply a chance to create a flashcard and stay active in the lecture itself. And so what we want to do is try to come up with a general definition for organic chemistry. What do we know about organic chemistry? Well, we know carbon can bond to itself. It can bond to hydrogen. It can bond to other oxygens, sulfurs, nitrogens. Okay, so non-metals. It also can bond to halogens as well. Okay, so I'm going to add that in. And we also know that it must have at least a carbon-hydrogen bond. So what we can do is basically make a definition for organic chemistry ourselves right now. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's try to put that all together. Again, and have this little moment to stop ourselves and write out, okay, organic chemistry. I know it's a study of compounds. I know those are organic compounds, right? And what are those compounds composed of? So I'll say study of compounds composed primarily, okay, of carbon. That down. Okay, so primarily composed of carbon, hydrogen, often combined with oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and halogens. You also can even add more here and just say non-metals. But the goal is to kind of just write down everything that you can think of and then put it together. You have to edit it, right? So that means just making sure that you come up with something in your own words that's going to help you just orient your brain about a definition for organic chemistry for yourself. That's it. Okay, so again, a flashcard in the front could be organic chemistry. On the back could be a definition in your own words. All right, folks, see you in the next video.